but then faded from sight. Nobody republished it. It disappeared until the Book of Enoch was rediscovered in the Ethiopian region of Abyssinia in the 1700s.
Long lost for centuries, the Book of Enoch resurfaced in the 1700s and shattered the early church's core beliefs. Every scholar, priest, and explorer who touched it walked away forever changed, some driven to obsession, others to the edge of madness. This 2,000-year-old text brims with forbidden revelations, cosmic horrors, and secrets powerful enough to topple empires. What hidden truths lurk in its pages? How did Joe Rogan unpack its mysteries? Strap in, because we're about to uncover the Bible's most terrifying chapter. The Lost Book of Enoch. 250 years ago, a Scottish explorer named James Bruce walked out of the Ethiopian highlands carrying something no European had touched in over 1,000 years. He carried 3 ancient books, written in the looping Ge'ez script, and bearing a name that turned heads across Europe. Enoch. The same Enoch from the Book of Genesis, the man who walked with God and was taken into heaven without dying. When Bruce placed those books on a table in London in the year 1773, he set off a ripple that's still spreading today. Those volumes had been copied and protected for centuries by Ethiopian monks and Jewish scribes. Now, they were in the hands of the West, and nothing about their content or journey would prove simple. Scholars quickly gave the book a label, pseudepigraphon, which is just a fancy way of saying the real author used a famous name to give the text more authority. In this case, they used Enoch. The term comes from Greek, pseudo meaning false, and epigraphian meaning to inscribe. Think of it like ancient ghostwriting. Between around 200 years before Christ and 300 years after, this was a common move. Dozens of religious texts claimed to be written by biblical legends, but putting Enoch's name on a book had special power. According to Genesis, Enoch didn't die. He was taken straight into heaven, suggesting he had access to divine knowledge most humans never saw. That's part of what drew James Bruce in. Centuries later, modern commentators like Joe Rogan praise the Book of Enoch as a source of hard-hitting truths about politics and the human struggle for power, and he's even brought leading scientists onto his podcast to explore its secrets. James Bruce wasn't just some random traveler. He was a tall, multilingual aristocrat from Stirlingshire who had joined a Masonic lodge in Edinburgh at age 23. In that circle, Enoch was treated like a prophet of ancient wisdom, even the creator of writing itself. When political tensions in Europe ruined Bruce's chances at a diplomatic post, he turned to exploration. He became obsessed with proving that the Nile's true source wasn't in Egypt, but in the Ethiopian highlands. So in 1768, armed with sextants, books on Arabic, and a Ge'ez phrasebook, Bruce began a brutal journey south, covering about 1,700 miles through swamps, deserts, and disease-ridden lowlands. That's the same distance as Boston to Miami. By the time he reached Gondar in 1770, he had managed to befriend local elites and secure something priceless: 3 full copies of the Book of Enoch, or Metzahafa Enoch, carefully preserved in monastic libraries. Getting the books out of Ethiopia was almost as hard as getting in. On the way back, Bruce's convoy got stuck in the Red Sea for weeks. He nearly lost the manuscripts to Ottoman quarantine policies. Then French pirates started circling. But Bruce somehow made it to London. In 1773, he presented the codices to the Society of Antiquaries. At first, critics mocked him. They thought he was exaggerating, but the evidence shut them up fast. The books were written on ancient parchment, sewn together in a traditional Ethiopian style. The ink tested consistent with Abyssinian materials, and 2 of the manuscripts were clearly dated to the early 15th century. One of them still lives at Oxford's Bodleian Library. Another ended up in the French National Collection. The third surfaced later in the Vatican's vaults. Bruce had told the truth. Still, for nearly 50 years, nobody outside Ethiopia could actually read what the book said. That changed in 1821 when a professor at Oxford named Richard Lawrence translated it into English. He used one of Bruce's copies but didn't have any Greek or Latin versions to cross-check, so his version was clunky, packed with strange phrases pulled straight from Ge'ez. Even so, it blew up. Victorian readers were obsessed with angels, giants, and ancient secrets. Publishers rushed to release newer editions in 1838, 1842, and finally in 1883. Each time they added notes from fresh Greek fragments that had turned up in other archives. But the biggest breakthrough came in 1893 when R.H. Charles, an Irish theologian, decided to do it right. He pulled together Lawrence's Ge'ez version, every Greek scrap he could find, and even some Latin pieces to create the first real critical edition. That work still forms the base for the modern translations we have today. Charles's research showed that Enoch's text had been circulating widely in Alexandria, Antioch, and even in 4th century Egypt. In fact, a scribe in a desert monastery there copied the book's final chapters onto papyrus now called Chester Beatty Papyrus 12. That little bundle of pages, dating to around the year 300, is still the only Greek version we have of Enoch's ending. Then, everything changed again in the winter of 1946. A young Bedouin shepherd threw a rock into a cave near Qumran and heard the sound of breaking pottery. Inside, he found jars packed with ancient scrolls, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among those scrolls were 6 Aramaic fragments of the Book of Enoch, labeled 4Q 201 through 4Q 206. These weren't medieval copies. They were at least 2,000 years old, dated to sometime before 100 BCE. That meant Enoch wasn't just a weird side note from the early church. It was older than Christianity itself. That discovery destroyed the theory that early Christian writers had invented the book from scratch. You can still see scans of those fragments on the website of the Israel Antiquities Authority. On one of them, 4Q204, you can even make out the phrase, Watchers of Heaven. Even with all this, Western churches had long since locked Enoch out of the official Bible. In the 4th century, councils at Laodicea and Carthage decided to include only books that had clear Hebrew origins. Enoch didn't make the cut, but Ethiopia never followed that decision. The Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church still treats the Book of Enoch as Holy Scripture. Every year, on the 28th day of Tasus, the Ethiopian calendar month, they read from it during their liturgy. The Beta Israel Jewish community does the same. They include Enoch in their traditional Orit readings, placing it right alongside the Torah. Out of all the world's Christian and Jewish groups, only those two give the book full canonical status.
But for a book that was so popular for ancient Jews and Christians, very few people today know about it.
Elsewhere, it remains in a strange spot, hugely influential but officially excluded. The New Testament letter of Jude, verse 14, even quotes it directly. Scholars who study angels and ancient cosmology still dig through its verses, and modern conspiracy theorists have latched onto it, linking it to everything from aliens to lost civilizations. But no major Protestant, Catholic, or Eastern Orthodox body has ever brought it back into the fold. And yet the evidence is everywhere. Greek and Latin fragments show that the book once circulated across the entire Mediterranean. Its disappearance from mainstream canon wasn't due to a lack of popularity. It was deliberately sidelined, possibly because its ideas were just too wild to fit into the official mold. So, the Book of Enoch wasn't just forgotten, it was buried on purpose. First by church authorities who didn't like what it said, and later by scholars who let it collect dust. But it keeps coming back. Every rediscovered manuscript, every translation, and every new scroll fragment brings it closer to the spotlight. The more we dig into its past, the more we realize how much it still unsettles modern readers. And if the book's history can stir this much controversy, just wait until we get into its actual story, because next up, we're going into the heart of its most explosive tale, the moment when 200 angels looked down from heaven and decided to fall. The fall of the Watchers. 200 powerful beings, called the Watchers in ancient Aramaic, were sent to watch over Earth. Just watch, nothing more. That was their one job. But according to the Book of Enoch, things didn't go as planned.
First of all, there's not just one Book of Enoch. In fact, the Book of Enoch typically refers to First Enoch.
These angels, led by an angel named Samyaza, looked down from the skies and saw women on Earth whose beauty, it says, blazed like the sun. Samyaza hesitated. He knew crossing that line meant horrific consequences, and he warned the others that he'd be blamed if things went wrong. But they didn't care. Every last one of them swore an oath, standing on Mount Hermon, sealing their rebellion. That moment marked the turning point, the beginning of a betrayal that would shake heaven and earth. Chapters 6 and 7 of the Book of Enoch lay out what happened in quick, matter-of-fact detail. Under the stars, these 200 watchers came down, took human wives, and fathered children. But these weren't normal kids. They were giants, the Nephilim. The name means the fallen ones. These giants had an endless hunger. First, they devoured all the crops, then the animals. Then they turned on humans. One scroll fragment from Qumran, designated 4Q531 from the Book of Giants, even features a giant speaking in the first person, boasting about his strength and violent exploits. Another fragment mentions Gilgamesh and Humbaba, figures from Sumerian mythology, showing how ancient Jewish writers mixed their own sacred history with old Mesopotamian legends. Experts who study ancient Assyrian and Babylonian texts have noticed striking similarities. Babylonian stories talk about 7 beings called the Apkallu, half-gods and wise men who taught humans everything from farming to city design. But after a great flood, they vanished beneath temple floors, transformed into statues with fishtails. The message was clear. Knowledge, without restraint, can drown the world. The Watchers in Enoch follow that same story beat for beat. They show up with knowledge, they pass it on too soon, and the world pays the price. Scholar Amar Annis points out that this overlap is too exact to be a coincidence. The writer of Enoch almost certainly rewrote those old legends to warn. Even good gifts, when given the wrong way, can destroy everything. The book doesn't just talk about what the Watchers did, it gets specific. Azazel, one of their leaders, taught humans how to forge swords, knives, and shields. Kazdeja taught women how to make abortion drugs. Gadriel, who one version claims misled Eve, taught war tactics and the movement of the moon. Penemu taught people how to brew potions, both healing and harmful. After every lesson, the book pauses to say that each piece of knowledge came with a disease. Today, archaeologists say the region started shifting from bronze to iron weapons around 1200 BCE. The writer of Enoch, working long after that, reframes this moment as a cosmic crime scene. But the blame wasn't just on the Watchers. Humans loved what they were learning. They embraced every weapon, every trick. The giants took it even further and led people into massive wars. It echoes Greek myths about the half-god titans fighting each other, but Enoch adds a deeper meaning. Knowledge without moral boundaries always ends in disaster.
Now, JR, you point out that Barnabas was taking an idea that's presented by Enoch.
Eventually, even the giants run out of food and start eating one another. One ancient line from the Ethiopic version says they feasted on the flesh and blood of men. Early Christian preachers actually used this part to argue that the flood was completely justified. High above all this destruction, 4 archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel, watch the chaos and bring their case before God. Their words are recorded almost word for word. You have seen what Azazel has done, who taught all unrighteousness on earth, and Samyaza, to whom you gave authority. In simple terms, they're filing a cosmic lawsuit, and they want action. First, throw Azazel into a pit. Second, lock up the rest of the Watchers. Third, clean up the earth. God doesn't wait. He tells Raphael to grab Azazel, chain him up, and throw him into a ravine called Dudael. Ancient writers place this area about 35 miles southeast of Jerusalem, near where the Israeli town of Sde Boker now sits. Today, geologists say the region is filled with volcanic rock and vertical pits, a real-life landscape that could easily pass for hell in ancient imagination. As for Samyaza and the rest of the Watchers, their punishment is even worse. Uriel says they'll have to sit and watch their own sons die in battle. After that, they'll be trapped under sharp rocks for 70 generations. Scholars argue about how long a generation is. Some say 40 years, others say 70, but either way, that sentence pushes their release far into the future, long past the time of the Babylonian exile, and even after the Roman Empire. Then comes a twist. The fallen angels ask Enoch himself to plead for them. Enoch agrees, writes a petition, and travels through flaming gates to deliver it to God. But the answer is no. Enoch returns to the Watchers' prison and reads the rejection out loud. Their cries are so loud they shake the mountains. It mirrors the earlier scene on Mount Hermon when they made that first oath. The book is sending a clear message. Once a vow is made in heaven's records, no one, angel or human, can undo it. While the Watchers face their sentence, one human family quietly receives instructions. Uriel appears to Noah, the son of Lamech, and tells him to build an ark. Not just any ark, a 3-level ship made of cypress wood, 500 cubits long. In modern units, that's about 750 feet, making it slightly longer than the Titanic. He's also told to stock it with grain. But here's the detail Genesis leaves out. Uriel warns Noah to stay hidden. The giants and desperate people will try to destroy the ark once word gets out. This warning shows just how badly society has fallen apart. As the ark begins to take shape, the giants turn on each other. One Aramaic scroll shows Gilgamesh having nightmares about a tablet being washed away in water. Most experts believe that's him realizing his fate is sealed. Another scroll includes the phrase, "Your end has come," which may have been spoken to Humbaba. These stories didn't stay local. By the 6th century, monks on the Silk Road in what's now Western China were copying the Book of Giants in Sogdian, an ancient language used in Central Asia. That's how far Enoch's influence spread. Back in the Ethiopian version, the archangels carry out their orders. Gabriel gives the giants weapons made from what the text calls meteoric iron, and they start slaughtering each other in a final war. The ground shakes, and their blood is said to rise as high as a horse's bridle. That image later shows up in the Book of Revelation. When the last giant dies, Michael seals the watchers under the earth with a heavy slab of black rock. Then, the floodwaters are ready. But the heart of this story isn't really about giants or floods. It's about what happens when knowledge gets separated from wisdom. Azazel thought swords would help humanity, but instead, they sped up the violence. Kazdeja's medicines were twisted into tools of harm. Gadriel's battle tactics replaced peaceful farming with endless war. Even makeup, like black eyeliner and red powder, was seen as dangerous because it masked the divine face of humanity. The Book of Enoch reads like an ancient warning. Don't get too confident in your own inventions, or you'll end up creating your own destruction. Some modern scientists talk about the Nephilim story in terms of genetics, about what happens when DNA doesn't match up. But that's not the real point. The giants in this book didn't just overstep biological rules. They tore through moral boundaries. They consumed instead of cared. Environmental thinker Matthew Sleeth says Enoch's story links violence to environmental collapse long before we ever had a word for climate change. Whether you see these giants as myth or metaphor, the warning hits hard. The Bible gives this whole saga only 6 verses in Genesis chapter 6. The Book of Enoch stretches it into 5 chapters. It gives the fallen angels names, tells us what they did, and even includes full-on courtroom speeches. That's why early church leaders didn't like it. If Azazel, not Adam, was the true inventor of sin, it messed with their idea of original sin. If angels had physical bodies and could fall, that clashed with later teachings that angels were just spirits. But this deeper version stuck around anyway. Medieval rabbis argued whether the Watcher's crime came before or after the golden calf. Muslim storytellers said Azazel was the same as Iblis, the jinn who refused to bow to Adam. Renaissance painters included Samyaza in the same fall from heaven as Lucifer. And today, the Watchers still pop up in comics and movies, often reimagined as ancient aliens. This story just won't go away. Someone now has to judge not just the angels, but every single person under the sky. That grand reckoning is outlined in Enoch's Book of Parables.
Now, in Unseen Realm, and again, I give you resources to other sources about this, Azazel was a demon.
The Book of Parables. Chapters 37 through 71 of the Book of Enoch begin with a quiet, almost mysterious tone, but end with something massive. Scholars now call this part the Book of Parables. But oddly, not a single piece of it showed up in the thousands of scroll fragments found at Qumran. That missing piece has led to a big debate over when it was actually written. Some experts argue that since it's not in the Qumran library, it must have been written later, maybe as late as the 1st century CE. Others believe that Ethiopic traditions show it existed well before the time of the Maccabees, around 100 BCE. Today, most scholars land somewhere in the middle, placing it in the last years of the Second Temple period, before Christianity began, but still quite late compared to other Enoch texts. The story kicks off right after a quick mention of Enoch's family. He's described as the 7th generation from Adam and is suddenly lifted into the sky. There he's shown 3 connected visions, called parables, but these aren't simple moral tales. They're more like courtroom declarations. The first one, which runs from chapter 38 to 44, shows a moment where the righteous rise like a new sunrise. All the arrogant kings and elites fall, and secrets that were long hidden are suddenly revealed. Enoch sees mountains melt and books of judgment laid out, where no bribe or royal order can stop what's coming. A single figure, called the Righteous One, stands in charge and says that some people's names will never be spoken again, because they used their power to crush the poor. The second vision, in chapters 45 through 57, gets more intense. It focuses on those who deny the name, meaning people who turn their backs on the true source of life. For them, nature itself turns against them. Stars fall, oceans rage, the air itself seems to rebel. The text says it would have been better if these people had never been born. That sounds very close to a later line in the Gospel of Mark. But this version doesn't focus on one traitor. It points at an entire class of corrupt leaders who care more about control than truth. Then comes the third and final vision, from chapter 58 through 71, and this one shifts the tone. Now the focus turns to reward. Enoch sees glowing robes waiting on golden racks, ready for those who stayed faithful. There are gardens where the scent of cedar trees never fades, and in the most powerful moment, Enoch himself is transformed. He's lifted up to a throne surrounded by fire, given a new name that later Jewish mystics would call Metatron. But this isn't just about status. He becomes the official recorder of the universe's final verdicts, the heavenly clerk with a pen in hand. As the vision closes, a countless number of glowing beings chant one endless note while Enoch hovers beside them. The courtroom of heaven has made its judgment. All through these three visions, one mysterious title keeps showing up, the Son of Man, or in the Ethiopic form, Walad La'ens. It's mentioned 10 times. For more than 100 years, scholars have argued over what exactly it means. Some Ethiopian religious leaders take it literally, as child of Adam, referring to Seth, who became the ancestor of humans after the flood. Scholar Larry Hurtado had a different take. He believed that in Second Temple Judaism, Son of Man wasn't a fixed title at all, which might be why Jesus later used it. It was flexible, open-ended. But another scholar, Daniel Boyarin, believed something else entirely. He thought that in the Book of Enoch, the Son of Man is already a fully divine figure, like the sky being from Daniel chapter 7, sharing a throne with God long before Christian theology ever existed. Whether it points to Seth, a divine judge from Daniel, or simply symbolizes all the righteous, one thing is clear.
Who will then come down to earth, rule the earth, and save the world. And this is the story that we're told in Daniel 7:13.
In this story, the Son of Man is where history turns. There's one moment where angels really take center stage, and it leaves a deep impression. In chapter 40, Enoch stands before the Lord of Spirits and sees 4 glowing beings who never sleep. He learns their names: Michael, the angel of mercy; Raphael, the healer; Gabriel, the warrior; and Phanuel, the one who brings hope. Their faces shine like metal, fresh out of a furnace, and they don't blink, don't turn, don't rest. Later, Christian stories would add more angelic ranks: cherubim, seraphim. But Enoch focuses only on these 4. Each one represents a part of judgment: mercy for the hurt, healing for the broken, strength to topple injustice, and hope that refuses to die. What's surprising is how little the Book of Parables actually says about theology. Unlike Revelation, it doesn't mention a lamb, a dragon, or a lake of fire. Still, its influence shows up everywhere. The rolling scrolls and huge crowds in St. John's Revelation sound a lot like Enoch's heavenly records and angel armies. The Gospel of Matthew's scene of sheep and goats mirrors, chapter 41.
Now, the Gospel of Matthew is the first book of the New Testament, and if you're familiar with the Bible,
where people are judged as if on balance scales. Even the phrase "books were opened" appears in Daniel, here in Enoch, and then again in Revelation, connecting 6 centuries of judgment imagery. But the parables never call the central figure Christ. They leave that spot open, like a blank space each generation can fill with its own hope. There's still one big question: why didn't the Qumran community, who preserved every other part of 1st Enoch, include this section? Some believe the group had its own religious leader and didn't accept any text that praised a different Messiah. Others think this part was only available in Greek by the time Qumran's library was sealed around 68 BCE, and their scribes just didn't have access to a copy. Some say it might have just been bad luck. Maybe the cave collapsed, or a goat ran off with it. Whatever the reason, the missing piece made scholars even more curious. But the parables don't obsess over timelines. Their real focus is ethics. Why do the proud fall? Because they used people. Why do deniers disappear? Because they laughed at the truth. Why do the faithful shine? Because they held on even when hope seemed weak. Nothing stays hidden forever. Every secret spills out eventually. Justice might take its time, but it always shows up. As Enoch puts down his pen for the last time, he's given one final gift: a sweeping tour of the cosmos, through stargates and lunar vaults, complete with a calendar more precise than any farmer's handbook. Let's dive in. Enoch's cosmic clock in the animal apocalypse. Enoch's next journey isn't about morals, it's about the universe itself. Guided by the fiery archangel Uriel, he's taken beyond Earth, into a space where 12 massive gates mark the rising and setting points of the sun and moon. Uriel then reveals a set of stone tablets, inscribed with the exact moments of every solstice and equinox, calculated down to fractions of a degree. These tablets lay out a solar calendar that no one in Jerusalem is using. It runs for 364 days, divided into 4 equal quarters of 91 days each, and locks seasonal festivals to the sun's position, so the dates never shift. Centuries later, 2 modern scholars, Eshbal Ratson and Jonathan Bendov, reconstructed an ancient Qumran scroll and found the same setup. It even included the cycle of priestly work shifts in the temple, confirming this calendar wasn't just theoretical, it was practiced. This scroll proves something major. At one point, ancient Judea was locked in a calendar war. Priests in Jerusalem used a lunar solar calendar, which lagged behind the solar year by about 11 days, unless constantly adjusted. But the sectarian community at Qumran, where the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, saw that kind of worship as flat-out wrong.
The Dead Sea Scrolls are a collection of ancient Jewish texts.
For them, praying or offering sacrifices on the wrong day was just as sinful as worshiping idols. Scholars still refer to this deep religious argument as the Calendar Wars. Some even believe it's what pushed the Essenes out into the desert in the first place. But in Enoch's vision, there's no debate. A solar year is the original divine template built into creation. Any calendar that's too short or too long breaks the rhythm of the universe. Enoch carefully notes that the tablets include 4 additional days, inserted at the turning of each quarter, to keep the seasons stable. Modern astronomy backs this up. A neat 91-day quarter keeps things balanced. Uriel declares these numbers unchangeable. If people tamper with the system, he warns, they'll invite disease and disorder. Enoch wakes from this vision deeply shaken. But instead of keeping it to himself, he writes everything down and hands it to his son, Methuselah. That moment, detailed in chapters 81 and 82, is historic. It's the first time in the Bible that someone passes down detailed scientific information through written records, not spoken stories. Later generations of priests would trace their calendar back to these very tablets. Right after learning how heaven keeps time, Enoch falls into one of his strangest dreams yet. Scholars call it the animal apocalypse. In this vision, the entire history of Israel is told through animals. White sheep stand in for the patriarchs. Their sinful descendants are shown as black sheep. Egyptian slave masters appear as wolves. Philistines become dogs. The Babylonians show up as lions, and the Persians soar in as eagles. Each new predator tears into the flock, until a massive ram with great horns charges out and starts fighting back. Most scholars agree that this horned sheep is Judas Maccabeus, the Jewish leader who, in 167 BCE,
So Judas Maccabeus leads a revolt against the Greek forces and are successful.
led a revolt that briefly reclaimed and purified the temple. The vision ends with a sparkling tower where all animals, symbols of all nations, finally eat together in peace. But that hopeful ending doesn't come right away. The vision begins with fear. In chapters 83 and 84, Enoch sees the sky folding like paper and water rushing through the cracks. It's a terrifying image, and clearly a warning of the flood to come. That sets the stage for the final stretch of the book, a mix of moral teachings and timeline predictions called the Epistles of Enoch and the Apocalypse of Weeks. Here, Enoch describes human history as unfolding in 10 major periods. The first week runs from Adam to the flood. The 7th ends with the rebuilding of God's house. The 10th week brings fire, destruction, and a new heaven. Scholars debate the specific dates, but the structure is clear. Time isn't random. Calendars aren't just for farming, they're how people align themselves with heaven's order. Then, tucked into all this cosmic order and allegory comes a birth that stunned ancient readers. Scrolls from both Ethiopic texts and an Aramaic version called the Genesis Apocryphon describe the birth of Noah in a very unusual way. His skin is white as snow, his hair is red like a blooming rose, and his eyes shine so brightly they light up the whole room. His father, Lamech, is terrified and runs to Methuselah, convinced the baby might be the child of angels. But Enoch steps in and calms their fears, saying Noah is pure and destined to survive the coming flood. One version of the scroll even says, the newborn spoke praise to God, echoing Isaiah's prophecy that even infants can speak divine truth. That scene still sparks debate today. On a recent podcast connected to the Joe Rogan network, guest Katie Williams argued that Western scholars cut Enoch from the Bible to erase the idea of a non-white patriarch. She sees Noah's glowing skin and hair as a clue that everyone else in the story was darker-skinned. But mainstream historians push back. Enoch was already left out by church councils in the 4th century, long before Europe's colonial era. And in Ethiopian religious art, Noah is often shown with that same reddish-white glow as a sign of his supernatural calling, not race. No matter where one lands, the fact that this debate still exists shows how powerfully the story still resonates. Thanks for watching. See you in our next video.